Welcome back. As you know, I am Eli, the computer guy, and in today's class, we are going to have a ChatGPT API introduction. So it's important to understand as we start this class that we're going to be talking about the API, the Application Programming Interface today for ChatGPT, and we're not really talking about the ChatGPT platform that most people are using. So when you hear about ChatGPT nowadays and you hear about how ChatGPT is, going to eliminate all coders and technology professionals' jobs, most of the people that are talking about ChatGPT, they're using a user interface that's provided by OpenAI where they log in, they tap out a question of some sort, and then it presents them a response. And they are in awe of that platform. And what I have to say to the normies out there is, bruh, do you even API, bruh? Because the thing that is going to keep coders employed, the things that's going to keep technology professionals employed, is to understand that the platform that most people are using is actually, I would argue, not that interesting. It's like Google, maybe Facebook or whatever. It is a platform that you're able to interface with, but what you're able to do with that platform, what you're able to ask from that platform, and what you're able to receive from that platform is limited by basically the system that they have created. The cool thing is when you start using application programming interfaces, APIs, is that you get to design the program. You get to design how data gets input into the system. You get to design what happens when the response comes back from ChatGPT, whether that gets put into a database system or something like that. You can actually create really amazing, really awesome software using ChatGPT as one of the resources that your overall system uses by basically using the API. The other cool thing about using the API is when we talk about APIs, there's something called service-oriented architecture. So we talk about systems architecture. There was mainframe architecture, client-server architecture, serverless architecture. I love me some serverless architecture. But anyways, there's something called service-oriented architecture. And one of the cool things with APIs to be thinking about is that you can build a system. So I'm going to show you today a little bit of code in Python. So basically you build the system in Python, maybe Node.js, if you're a Node developer. But anyways, you design your system in Python. And the cool thing is, right, so basically you can make a request from OpenAI's ChatGPT API. Ask it questions, tell it to give you a story, whatever else. You get the response back and you parse that, you deal with it as you wish. But the cool part is if a new AI service, a new large language model service comes out in the future, maybe in the future Google's Bard is better. Maybe in the future Meta's Llama 2 you decide is better, something like that. The cool part is you can have this whole application built out, and because you're simply using an API call to make a request of the AI service, you can simply swap out, 5-10 lines of code so that your system is now going to Bard or Meta or whoever else instead of going to ChatGPT. So one of the cool things now is you can start developing applications that use artificial intelligence, again, for these kind of intelligence-y type resources. And in the future, a year from now, 2 years from now, whatever else, if there is a reason for you to change where that AI resource comes from, it is relatively easy. So that's one of the great things about using these APIs too. And the important thing I want you to be thinking about, again, when I'm talking to you folks, right, when I'm sitting here and I'm talking to a camera, I have to imagine the people that I'm talking to, because I don't know who you thousands of people are. But when I think about you folks, I think about technology professionals. And one of the things, if you're going to be a good technology professional, is you have to keep being employed. The difference between professional and amateur is whether or not you get a paycheck. So one of the problems we have right now with things like ChatGPT or whatever else comes out is you have people going, oh no, my job is going to be taken away by ChatGPT. Well, your task is to keep your job by finding out what you can build for your company or your organization using something like the ChatGPT API to continue to make you valuable. Right? So if your company decides to use ChatGPT, and the way they decide to use ChatGPT is simply through the OpenAI's ChatGPT interface, where they tippy-tap type out. Basically, somebody swipes a credit card, people get a whole bunch of accounts, and you no longer have a job. Right? You don't need to maintain ChatGPT's user interface. There's no administrative tasks or antivirus services that you have to provide, right? You set that up and your job goes away. Here's a cool thing though. If instead of having your company just use this bland, generic, what everybody else uses, ChatGPT interface, what if you build a company-specific, a niche application that solves exactly the problem that your company or your CEO cares about? And that means you continue to get paid while you build a thing, you continue to get paid to maintain a thing, and you get paid to improve it as time goes by. And that's how technology professionals stay technology professionals. Again, I've been doing technology since 1996, literally. This is my MCSE card. So my MCSE from 2000. My MCSE may literally be older than many of the people that are watching this video. And time again, we all thought we were going to become obsolete. And what we found is the people that keep up with the times, the people that change and learn new technologies and figure out how to be valuable, continue to keep their jobs. And the people that just want to do what they were doing yesterday forever and ever and amen, well, they go off to find different professions. So anyways, today we're going to be talking about the ChatGPT API to show you basically how this is used to integrate into systems that you may be designing into the future. I think this is really cool, really interesting. And again, the amazing part is, I don't know, what is it, 10 lines of code? It is so simple to implement. Remember, boys and girls, AI is hard. People over at OpenAI, they are brilliant. They are amazingly smart. AI is hard. APIs are not. A potato can make an API call, and I'm going to show you why I say that in the class that we're doing today. So before we go any further, let's go over to the computer so I can show you what the ChatGPT and the DALL API code looks like so you kind of have an idea of what we're talking about. So this is the platform that you're probably used to using, right? This is what the normies use, the folks that don't even understand what an API is, right? You come to ChatGPT, you create your account, you either don't give them money or you give them a couple of bucks, and you can come here and you can ask them questions. I do have to say, ChatGPT, the platform, is absolutely awesome for asking code syntax questions when you're dealing with a language that you're not used to using. When you can simply ask ChatGPT, how the hell do I say this in X, Y, or Z? It's absolutely amazing. But we come here, and I don't know, we say 2, plus 2, and we hit enter. It goes through, it tries to figure out what 2 plus 2 is, and it tells us 4, right? Tell me a story about a goat and boat. You know, we can click on this. Once upon a time in a quaint coastal village named Willowbrook. It is amazing, I've got to say. But anyways, this, again, is basically what the normies use. And of course, if it's what the normies use, we're not going to be using it today. So here is an example of code for ChatGPT. So this code is in Python. I have this opened up in something called VS Code, and I'm running this on an M2 Mac. The operating system doesn't matter for running this particular code. Basically, it should run on anything that has Python 3 installed. We're going to talk about the code in a different section of this particular video. I just kind of want to demo how this works for you, right? So basically, here is where I write the query, right? Where I write the question. What do I want this thing to write about? And I'm going to ask why Boxing Day is important. I don't know, for some reason I've been hearing a lot about Boxing Day lately. So tell me why Boxing Day is important. We have this code down here that basically this is how you ask a ChatGPT a question. I'm going to say I want you to be a teacher. So say this in the voice of a teacher. I'm going to say I want a 500-word blog post. And then basically I'm dumping in this particular query. I then hit the run button. This pops up as it normally does. And if we give it a couple of seconds, it will tell us what Boxing Day is in 500 words or so. And there you go. So you notice when we get the response back for the API, it doesn't tippy-tap out kind of in that animated style that it does on the platform, but it tells us, right? So as dust settles after the excitement of Christmas Day, another holiday that holds significant importance in many countries around the world takes center stage. Boxing Day, observed on the 26th of December. Boxing Day, blah, 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 blah. Oh crap, I don't actually care about Boxing Day. But this is all the text that I get back. And since this is all in code, since I get this text back as basically a variable value, then I can do things such as print this out to a web page, dump this into a database, use the result that comes back from ChatGPT in order to feed into some other type of script, that type of deal, right? Then, past that, one of the things that OpenAI allows us to do is a DALL-E. So DALL-E allows us to create images, basically simply using text prompts that come out with varying qualities. Let me clear the screen down here. Basically with this, we're going to make a query, a goat with a trench coat, because that's the kind of person I am. I'm going to ask for one picture. You can actually ask for multiple pictures. I'm going to tell it what the size is. And then basically here, it's going to print out the image URL. Again, if I hit run, this is going to go up to DALL-E. And we'll see. We'll see what the results are. Okay, so this right here, this is a link to the image. So when this gets created, the image is actually up on their servers. If you want to download that, you have to do a different step to download that. But anyways, I'm just going to hit the command button here, hit enter, and there we go. We have a a goat and a trench coat. So anywho, that's a little demo of what the API allows you to do. And the rest of the class, we're going to go into the importance of this and how this all works a little bit more. So what is ChatGPT really, right? So an important thing as a technology professional, we kind of sort of gotta understand what the hell we're installing. To be clear, you're never completely sure what you're installing, but you got to at least pretend. So when we start talking about ChatGPT, one of the important things to understand is the concept of generative AI, generative artificial intelligence. And what this means is every response you get back from ChatGPT is supposed to be, and I will say supposed to be, basically created every instance that the question is asked. So when you make a request of the ChatGPT API, if you make the exact same request 5, 10, 20 different times, you will get back unique answers. Now, how unique the answer is, that's a little bit of a question mark, but they should be unique answers. This is not simply like a database query where you make a database query, and if we make the same database query 20 times, we're literally going to get the exact same response, right? And the reason is because basically what generative AI does is it has statistical models. So basically a lot of information is dumped into these systems, and these systems try to figure out the statistical correlation between these different things. And then what happens is when you make the request, it tries to figure out basically what data statistically should be the response for what you're asking based off of what's been input previously. And then what it does is it slowly builds a response. And so it puts down the first word or the first pixel. It takes a look at that, goes, okay, that's fine. Then it puts down the next word and the next pixel or whatever else. And then it looks at that, and then it tries to figure out what the next one should be, and then the next one should be, and then the next one should be, and then the next one right? So it's actually generating the response every time it does it. And that's why we call it generative AI, which is really interesting from a technical standpoint. This is very interesting because you're literally getting a different response every time you ask a question. But something as a technology professional you have to be thinking about is your users are literally going to get a different response every time they ask the exact same question. So one of the things you have to be thinking about when you design your systems is, does that make sense in your particular environment? Now, there's something called caching. So caching is one of those great tools nobody talks about enough in the technology world, where what a cache is basically when a response comes in from a different system, you actually store that response locally, maybe into a database, something like that, so that instead of your user having to go out to the internet again to make a request, they can just go to that local data store to pull whatever has been brought in before. So DNS does a lot of caching. So when you go to CNN.com or FoxNews.com, wherever you go, basically instead of you having to go out to the internet every time to find the IP address, many times it'll get cached on your local computer or your local router, something like that. And Netflix does caching and that type of deal. So one of the things to be thinking about in this whole generative AI world is, do you really want unique answers every time your user asks a question? And if you don't, maybe using some kind of caching mechanism where somebody asks a question, that response comes in, gets cached in a database. The next time somebody asks the exact same question, basically the query goes to the database rather than out to the AI. That's one thing to consider. One of the other things to be thinking about with ChatGPT is you will hear that it's called a large language model, and that it understands English, it understands language. An important thing to consider right now is the whole question of what is AI? What is artificial intelligence? What's the answer? I don't know. I'm not going to get into that argument. But one of the issues that we run into in the real world being technology professionals is that when computers seem to act like humans or act like creatures, we want to ascribe intelligence onto those machines, even when it's not necessarily so. For users, for normies, doesn't really matter one way or the other, but as technology professionals, it can become a problem, again, when we start implementing systems and deploying solutions and that type of thing. So we talk about large language models. All that's really done here is the system doesn't actually understand English. So this is a reason why we get things like hallucinations, bad information, weird stuff out of these large language models. And people are like, I don't understand. I thought the system was intelligent. Why did we get this crappy response? Because the system's probably not intelligent. What the system does, especially as far as text is concerned, is basically it turns text into tokens. Right? So the unit of whatever in the large language model world is actually a token. So what a token is, it is either a word, a part of a word, or a symbol. So basically, when you dump text into a large language model, it chops up all of this text into tokens. And tokens, again, are not even complete words. And then what it does is it figures out the statistical correlation between all of those tokens, right? 99% of the time, this token comes after this token. 99% of the time, these two tokens come after these three tokens, right? And it puts it all of that together. So when we're dealing with artificial intelligence, or we're dealing with these large language models, basically what we're dealing with is systems that understand the mathematical correlation between these tokens, will then give us a response based off the mathematical correlation of these tokens, and that gets translated into English, which looks like the computer is speaking English. No, it's speaking token, which is an entirely different world, and one of the things just to consider with these systems. The final thing to be thinking about when you go out there and you start thinking about using ChatGPT or Bard or Llama 2 or any of the other large language models or AI, quote-unquote AI systems out there, is you do have to be asking yourself, are the functionalities being provided by the platform, is that a large language model, or are those things on top of large language models? So I think about this when I first started trying to learn Linux, right? So I'm an MCSE from 2000. I also went through the boot camp for Windows 2 for 2000 back in the day. So I have my MCSE in NT 4.0. I went through the boot camp for 2000. And one of the big problems that I ran into is when I started trying to do Linux, I started asking how you do things. Right. Well, how do you set up VPN services? Like what's Linux's version of routing a remote access server? What's Linux's version of what was it, SMB, server message blocks? What's the version for I don't know, all the different stuff, right? When you buy a Windows server, not only do you get the operating system, kernel, and device drivers and all that kind of stuff, you get everything, including the kitchen sink. Almost anything you want to do with that server, there is already software installed in that product that allows you to do it. So when you get your MCSE, you're not simply learning about device drivers and basic networking and all that kind of stuff. You're actually learning about all this other software that becomes pre-packaged with a Windows server. The problem is when you go out to start learning Linux servers, you install Linux server, and you get a blinking cursor. And you're like, how do I upload a file to the server? Well, figure out what FTP service you want to use. You're like, what do you mean? What do you mean, which service? And you find out there's 30 FTP services and 50 VPN services and a whole bunch of different web servers and all kinds of whatever else, right? The thing is when you use Linux, one of the the powerful things about Linux is that it's a very just bare bones system that when you get it and you only install what you need, which is great once you're a Linux administrator, which will make you lose your mind when you're a brand new Linux administrator and you're used to the Windows world. So why I bring that up is I think one of the things that people are not thinking about with these large language models, again, when we talk about ChatGPT or Bard, is that when we're dealing with the platform, so right in the demo section, when I showed you that user interface where you can ask a question, 2 plus 2 or whatever else, one of the things you have to understand is that is not simply a large language model. That is a large language model with other services built on top. So think about this like with math. One of the things that people have complained about with these large language models is in regards to math, that they're very bad at math. And the reason that they're very bad at math is because they don't understand how to do math. They don't have a calculator generally, right? They understand the statistical relationship between tokens, which are words, parts of words, or symbols, and how those are supposed to get put out there, right? And so basically, if you ask just a basic large language model a math question, if it has seen the math question before with the appropriate answer, it will give you an answer and it will look like the large language model did math. It did not do math. It's simply seen that whole thing before, and it knows statistically what you're looking for, and so that's what you get. Well, what becomes interesting, though, again, with these large language models, is if the large language model itself isn't good at math because it really doesn't understand math, one of the things that you can do as a platform, again with OpenAI or Google or whatever else, is you can have a large language model understand how to turn your question into an equation, and then you send that equation to a different math system that actually has the brain power of a pocket calculator. And then the response that you get back is actually an answer from that mathematical system that's been created. And so one of the things that you have to be thinking about when you're going out there to start using these are large language models, is what other services are built on top of whatever it is that you're using that provides value to the end user. So one of the things, like I see this a lot where people talk about memory, right? So if you deal with the ChatGPT, the normal user interface, it remembers your conversation. So you'll hear people say that ChatGPT remembers the conversation. The important thing to understand is, again, the platform does. When you go to use the API, right? That's an additional thing that's been built on the platform. When you go to use the API, you actually have to build in your own memory system so that that ChatGPT knows what the previous conversation has been. You actually have to design and build that. And that'll become very important as you start building out systems and you start relying on these services, you start relying on these products, again, verifying exactly what you're getting out of the product. Are you only getting a large language model, or are you getting a large language model with some kind of mathematical system on top of that, with moderation systems on top of that, with memory systems on top of that, with a whole bunch of additional systems? And you look at, again, just like I did with Windows Server, this is a large language model. It's like, well, yes, it is a large language model with about 50 other things built on top. Again, you can run into the AI equivalent of actually getting just a large language model and again having the equivalent of a little blinking cursor going, crap, what do I do next? So this is something to be thinking about with the whole question of, again, exactly what is ChatGPT when we're talking about generative AI and large language models, and for you to really be looking at these products to fully understand what you're getting out of them so that also when you deploy them to your end users, they feel comfortable with them. Again, if your CEO comes to you and tells you ChatGPT remembers your conversation, and then you go build some kind of system with the API, which by default doesn't remember any conversations, because that's not how the API system works, right? You can run into some quirky problems there. So anyways, that's kind of an overall idea of what we're talking about with ChatGPT. So now let's talk about how you get access to the API key and a few words about pricing. Again, one of the things to be thinking about as a technology professional is something that is dirt cheap when you are using it on a one-off occasion can become brutally expensive in a production environment. Something that you need to be thinking about as a professional is what happens when you start getting 1,000 requests per second on your server and you're making these calls up to OpenAI and you're paying, I don't know, a fifth of a penny per request that's going up there, right? A fifth of a penny for a request. Well, that's dirt cheap. Who the hell cares? A fifth of a penny times 1,000. Okay, well, you know, that's, I mean, we can still afford that. A fifth of a penny times 1,000 per second. Things can get brutally expensive, and so that's something to consider again in the real world. Anyways, with that, let's go over to the computer so I can show you some of the back, the dashboard and stuff that you'll be dealing with OpenAI. So the first thing I do want to hammer home is pricing, right? Again, if your startup goes bankrupt, you're no longer going to have a job. Eli, why do you keep talking about things like prices? Because there's only so much money in the pot. Anyways, you can come to openai.com. You can come take a look at pricing, and you can take a look at that there are different prices for the different models. So you'll hear a lot of people talk about the GPT-4 model right now. This is the superior model. This is an amazing model. This is the model that everybody uses. Why would anybody use the old nasty 3.5 model? Well, the reason is because the old nasty 3.5 model costs now, at this price has actually gone down since I used it last, is now literally less than a fifth of 1 penny per 1,000 tokens for input and a fifth of a penny for 1,000 tokens output. Now, when we start talking about tokens, again, this gets very confusing. I would say as a long-term professional, it appears that OpenAI might be obfuscating the real cost of their platform to make it confusing for new coders. I mean, but I'm just a jaded old geek, you know. But when you start looking at this, again, you start looking at tokens. You're like, well, what is a token? So a token is more or less, and I do have to say this, approximately 750 words, right? So when you're taking a look at the cost here, so about a fifth of a penny equals 750 words. Now with this, do realize that you are billed based off off of the input and the output, right? So when you submit the query up to OpenAI, however many words that is, you will get billed for that, and you will get billed for the response. So this is an important thing. You'll hear a lot of people out there say, well, just upload the book or the documentation to OpenAI, and then it will give you a nice little one-page tutorial. Well, if you upload a 50-page book, it might end up costing you a lot of money at the end of the day for OpenAI to process it. But anyway, so the 3.5 model, so 4,000 tokens. So the entire thing is 4,000 tokens. Not too bad. It'll cost you right around 1 penny per request. Then comes in at, again, a fifth of a cent. If you look at 16,000 tokens, right? So you upload a lot more information. You see that the cost under the 3.5 model then goes to, what is that? A third of a penny per 1,000 tokens, or a fourth of a penny on the output, right? So if you put up 16,000 tokens, I don't know, that whole thing is going to cost you about 5 cents. Now, again, that doesn't seem like a lot. 5 cents, Eli. I can just make it rain 5 nickels, right? But again, remember, if your system is getting hammered to high hell and back and you don't have a caching mechanism like I talked about before, that can start to get expensive. Where it becomes even more brutal, though, is when you go up to the GPT-4 model. So this is the superior model that everybody thinks that they need to use, even when they generally don't. 8,000 K context costs 3 cents. So literally 10x what the 3.5 model, 16K, is for the input, and 6 cents on the output. For that 750 words. That can start to get expensive. 32,000 context is 6 cents on the input and 12 cents on the output. So 32,000 tokens is quite a few words, right? You send up, you get a response. You could literally be spending almost $4 per request that you make to ChatGPT, which will definitely bankrupt your startup in a heartbeat. And you have to be careful about this. So we've done a class for Silicon Dojo. I will also do a video class showing how to parse web pages. But an interesting thing is, so with Python, you can make a request of an entire web page and then send that to ChatGPT to have it parse the web page, give you a summary, that type of thing. You do have to understand, if you take an entire web page, so you go to Ars Technica and you take an entire web page and you just submit that thing to OpenAI, with all of the JavaScript, the CSS, all the formatting text that you don't normally see, that comes to 21,000 tokens. So something that so a blog post that might be 800 words should cost you a fifth of a penny. All of a sudden, if you actually upload the entire web page because you're not thinking about it, it'll be 21,000 tokens. Again, you get up to the GPT-4 model. That means you're going to be spending $1.20 just on the upload, and then whatever the cost is for the download. And so again, these are the things that you have to be thinking about. And honestly, that's why I generally use the 3.5 model. The 3.5 model is very good for the things that I use it for. And when you look at the price difference, it's a big deal. If we come down, there's a whole bunch of different prices here, again, that you should take a look at. One of the things, again, I was showing you how to use DALL. If you start doing images, so with DALL, for a 1024 by 1024, that'll come to 2 cents an image. 512 by 512 is 1.8 cents per image, and a 256 by 256 is 1.6 cents per image. So again, those costs aren't huge, but one of the things, again, to be thinking about with your code is you can actually do the number of images that you want created. So if that number is 10, and you're doing 1024 by 1024, that means every time you make a request, it's going to cost you 20 cents, which, again, depending on what you're doing, may be expensive or may be inexpensive, but it's definitely things to be thinking about. Okay, so past that, let's go over to the OpenAI webpage. So basically, we're not going to ChatGPT. We're going to OpenAI.com. If you need to sign up, you will click on the sign up. I am already logged in, so I will log in. Gives you the ChatGPT, gives you the DALL-E. What we want here is the API. We come over here to the API, and there's a whole bunch of great information, right? So we've got the documentation here. And so basically with this documentation, it tells you a lot of things about the code. It tells you best practices, function calling, a whole bunch of things. We go over to the API reference. This will actually give you the code for actually being able to make requests and things. So if we take a look at this, so this is for DALL-E. And again, as I showed you, this is basically all the code. There's a final little snippet that you have to put in there, but this gives you the code samples and that type of stuff. It also gives you examples, which I don't know, they exist. I'm kind of disappointed with the examples that they give, but they do give you examples, so you can come here and take a look at examples if you want. Now, to get the API key, what you need to do is you need to come over to this little link over here. You can click on this. Oh no, it showed you my account. Anyways, might have to delete that. We can come down, we can do manage account, we can view API keys, we can see the pricing, all of that kind of stuff. If I go to the manage the account, one of the important things here is to go to rate limits. So the rate limits will show you basically how many requests you can make, with the system. So 90,000 tokens per minute or 3,500 requests per minute. This might be an issue that you might run into. We can go to usage. So we go here, we take a look at the usage, and we find out my usage is pretty low. Oh, I couldn't fetch. Anyways, so we can see I did a class, I think on August 1st, and I paid 12 cents for the whole class. I've been messing around with stuff today, and so I did 11 cents there. That's not too bad. If we can go down to billing, basically one of the important things here with billing is the usage limits, especially since we're dealing with API keys. I can click on this usage limit, and basically I can say I want a hard limit of $10, right? So again, whenever you're dealing with API keys, one thing you have to be careful about is what about a while true loop? So a while true loop is a loop that never ends because it never breaks, right? The conditions are never correct for it to break. So if you keep looping, again, with DALL-E or anything else, and you just keep hammering the hell out of OpenAI, they're going to bill you for each one of those requests, all the tokens that you submit. So one of the important things is, so we have a soft limit here, so basically you get a notification if I hit $5, and I have a hard limit of $10 to make sure that I don't run into any billing problems going into the future. So that's an important thing. Definitely you need to set up. And then past that, basically we can go to the API keys. So we click on the personal, we click on view API keys, and this is where you get your API key. So you have a couple of API keys. So this is the key that I've been using today. So I can create a new API key. I can give it a name if I want. Then I create the secret. Then this gives me the API key. I have to copy this. So once I see this, I will never see this again. So what I do is I will copy this. I will dump this into my code, or I'll dump this. Really, it should be into environment variable, but that's its own little world. And then go from there. Then I can be done, and there you go. Now I have my API keys. So that's the pricing, and this is the back end dashboard that you'll be looking at. And this is where you come, again, to get the API keys and find the examples for the code and all that kind of stuff. So now you know how to get your own API keys, and hopefully you've taken my warning about the prices. Oh, Eli's just making a big deal about prices. It doesn't matter. This is so cheap. And then a month later, your startup is bankrupt because you weren't listening to somebody that's been doing this longer than you've been alive. But anyways, with that, now that you understand the basic concepts here and how to get your API keys, let's go back to the computer so I can show you the code and basically explain the code that we went over before in the demonstrations so you have an idea of how this works. So this is the ChatGPT code. So the first thing that we do here is we import the OpenAI module. So for your Python environment, this is very easy. If you understand Python, basically all you do is you say pip3 install OpenAI. That will install OpenAI onto your system, and then you would simply import the module here. We then have the API key. So again, I know a lot of viewers out there would be like, I'm gonna hack your API key. To be clear, this API key will be deleted long before you see this video. And with that, from a security standpoint, again, if you're going to be putting this into a production environment, you actually use something called environment variables. So you would set this API key as an environment variable, and then you would call the environment variable. Again, so basically people can't copy and paste your damn API key. For testing purposes, for educational purposes, though, I find it a lot easier just to copy and paste this thing in and then delete my API key every day or so. So anyways, this is the API key. We then have the query here. So basically, this is going to be the question, what we are asking of ChatGPT. Why is Boxing Day is important? Tell me a story about a snail and a squirrel. Whatever that is. This is going to be the query. So I have separated this out from the overall little system here for ChatGPT, just because I find it easier, just to mentally think about. But you can actually theoretically put it down here. Again, we're calling the query value down here. You could put this value here if you wanted to, but again, from a coding standpoint, this is what I do. So we're going to create a variable. So we're going to have a variable. The variable is going to be response, and it's going to equal OpenAI.chatCompletion.create. So basically, this is just a function that you use. Again, predefined function from ChatGPT. Model equals, so you tell it what model you're going to be using. So 3.5 turbo. Again, you could put 4 in here if you wanted to. And then you have messages, right? So messages is really kind of an interesting thing. So for the messages, you have what is called the role value. So with the role value, this basically tells ChatGPT what you want from ChatGPT, but it gives some information. So there is a system role, and so there's only ever one system role. And what this system role is it basically says, what character is ChatGPT playing? Is it a politician? Is it a teacher? Is it I don't know. Is Stephen Colbert? I don't know who it is, right? Basically, you say, you are what? You want to say what voice you want ChatGPT to give the response in, what character, Shakespearean playwright or whatever. Then down here for role user, again, there is also only one entry for a role user, and that is going to be the actual question itself. Why is Boxing Day important? Give me a story about a squirrel and a snail, whatever that is. In between those, there's a role for assistant. So there can be numerous assistants. I'm not quite sure the total number of assistants, but a lot. Just keep putting them in until it fails. You'll be fine. And basically what this is this is a guide. It's a guide to tell ChatGPT what additional formatting, what additional information you want out of the response, right? So for here, write a 500-word blog post. So if I just say, why is Boxing Day important, it will, and I don't give this assistant here, it might give me a sentence, it might give me a book, it'll give me whatever it wants to give me. So this, I can say, write a 500-word blog post, or a 300-word blog post, or a 5,000-word article for the New York Times, right? This basically is a way to guide. One of the things that you can also do here is when you're trying to get values that you're going to use, and additionally for additional Python scripts, you can do things such as basically say, I want the response in the format of, let's say, a list, item 1, item 2, item 3. Or you can just give a whole bunch of different assistants here, again, to guide the response in one way or the other. So again, you can put in all kinds of different stuff here. Then we have this print. So this was commented out before because I didn't want you to deal with it before. So this is the response, right? So this is going to be the value for the response, and here we're going to print out the entire value. So what happens is when we get the response value back, this comes back out as JSON. So JSON is basically a data type or whatever that's used in the web world to be able to send information with values attached. So name equals whatever, right? A whole bunch of different stuff, right? So basically, when you ever hear of a JSON response, basically this is a response with data that is pre-formatted so that you can parse it on the other side. When we have the print down here, this is how you print out the pre-formatted information. So basically, if you want the whole JSON response, you just print response, and you get that. Here, we say print response, index choices, index 0, index message, index content, and that will only give us the specific thing that we care about, right? So anyways, let's run this again, and then I will show you the JSON response so you can have an idea what that JSON response looks like. So now we have the response, and so this is the full response. So basically when we come up here, this response is when we print out just the content, we get this nice text. You're like, oh, I can deal with that. Here's the JSON response up here. So the JSON response is all of this data that gives you a lot more information, right? So response, choices, and then this is a list, so index 0. Then we come down here to message. Then we come down here to content. And this is what gives us the content here, right? So this is the full JSON response. Come down here, it gives us a timestamp for created, tells us what the model is, tells us what the tokens are. So this cost us 581 tokens. Again, remember the input tokens will cost you. So 31 input tokens, 612 completion token. Oh, because I'm sorry. So it's 581 tokens to get the response, 31 tokens for the query that you asked, and it costs you a total of 612 tokens. So this is something that you might want to input into a database system to verify how many tokens that you're using, especially if the system becomes more expensive than you're expecting. But this is some additional information that you get beyond the response that you're looking for, and so this is what, again, ChatGPT API gives you back. Now this is the DALL API. So again, very simple. We import the OpenAI module like we did before. We feed it the OpenAI key in the very insecure fashion that you should not do in a production environment. We then have the query, a goat with a trench coat. Then we have the response. So a lot like the ChatGPT, but a little bit different. For this, we say OpenAI.image.create. So the prompt is the query. So you could simply put this query down here within double quotation marks. We do a comma. N equals the number of responses. So do be careful because I think they default to multiple. I mean, as a vendor, do. If they're going to give you an example, why bill you 2 cents per query when they could bill you 10 cents per query. So basically this is how many responses that you're going to get. And then you have size. One of the only things I kind of dislike about DALL-E is they do have fixed sizes. It's 256 by 256, 512 by 512, or 1024 by 1024. Honestly, the price difference, unless you're doing this at scale, I would just say do 1024 by 1024 because it costs you 2 cents for 1024 by 1024. It costs you 1.6 cents for 256 by 256. And I do have to say the 256 by 256, the quality is pretty piss poor. So for, I don't know, whatever it is, less than half of a penny, I would argue it's better to get the higher quality, but you do you. Also, one of the things to be considering here, again, remember generative AI. So if you get the perfect picture, but it's 256 by 256, yeah, well, you're just going to have to play the slots again, right? So just one of those things to consider there. We're going to have image URL. Equals response data 0 URL, and then we're going to print the image URL. I guess I can also do the I can do the response here if we want. Again, print response. So this will give us the actual JSON value if you want to take a look at that. So this will just print out the URL for the image. This will print out the entire JSON response. We hit the run. Okay, so it's going through right now. We should get a response in a second. And here's our response. So up here is the JSON response. So if we take a look, right? So response data. So basically here's where the JSON begins. We want data, we want 0, we want URL, and this gives us the URL. So there will be multiple URLs here. If we ask for more, down here, this is just the URL itself. I can hit Command, I can hit Enter, and there we go. Look at that. We got a little goat and a trench coat. Yay, isn't that exciting? The important thing to realize, though, with this is you will notice this is actually up on Windows.net. This is up on their servers. This will remain on their servers for approximately 60 minutes. Give or take 60 minutes. I don't know. They tell you it'll be up there for 60 minutes. I don't trust that type of thing. So one of the things you do have to think about for your system is how you're going to download this image into wherever it needs to be stored for a data store, right? So again, imagine you're creating images for blog posts, that type of thing. You create the image, you link to the image, you say your day is done, and then, after a little bit of time, the image goes away and your app breaks. You do have to be careful with that. So if we want to print multiple images, let me just get rid of this print image URL here. We'll just get the whole JSON response back, and let's say we want to do 3 images, right? So sometimes it makes sense to do 3 images or 5 images or 10 images, right? Even 10 images will cost you, 20 cents or whatever to do that. So it might make sense just to be pretty quick. With that, we can hit save, and now we can hit run. For this, we're going to get the JSON response back because I don't want to deal with 4x loops with you guys. At this point in time, you'll learn 4x loops in the future. But basically, here we go. So we get the full JSON response. This is when it's created. So we have URL1. I can click on this, and we get that goat in a trench coat. I can then come down here to URL2, click on this. Oh, that's kind of a swanky goat in a trench coat. And then if we scroll down some more, I can click on this, and we have a different, I don't know, that's kind of like a kimono. Maybe that's like a pervert goat. I don't know. But anyways, so for this one request, we're able to get these 3 responses. And so we can figure out which goat in a trench coat that we like best. But this is basically how the code works when you're going to be using it. Really past this, it's then building everything that goes around the API call to create your AI-powered application. So this is why coders and real technology professionals will keep their jobs. Even if AI is doing certain things, you're still going to need to build systems around that AI component. Again, thinking about things such as input. So for Silicon Dojo, when I do the in-person classes, we've done many classes at this point in time for basically inputting into AI. Parsing web pages. So in order to parse a web page, you can't just send the entire web page unless you want to spend $1.50 per page. We use in Python, there's a module called Beautiful Soup. Beautiful Soup can go in, rip out only the text that we care about, send that off to ChatGPT, we get the response back, and then we dump it into our system, right? That all has to be designed. Again, interesting things like PDFs. One of the things I really like about ChatGPT is basically it's kind of like regex on crack for parsing. So regex is called regular expressions, and basically it's used in programming to parse text, parse responses, to pull out the data that you care about, right? You have a whole bunch of text, whatever it is, web page, form, something like that, and you have to pull out the very specific data that you care about. One of the interesting things is there are modules in Python that allow you to turn PDF files into text. Right? And so an important thing, again, in the coding world, is once you turn something into text, it's pretty easy to deal with. Turning it from something else into text, that's a pain in the butt. Once it's text, I can deal with it. The interesting thing, though, is PDFs, you don't really consider this, but they are both a text-based form of information, but also a visual form of information, right? There's formatting, there's images, there's quasi-tables, there's all kinds of stuff on a PDF form. So one of the problems that you can run into is you turn a PDF into text, and to be clear, it did an amazing job. It does an amazing job. Every single word of that PDF is now in text. But it's a mess. To call it spaghetti is to be polite. It's just a whole bunch of words in a pile. So one of the cool things that you can do is you can use this Python module to turn a PDF into text. You can then take that mess of text, send it up to ChatGPT, and say, hey, I would like the person's name, the person's phone number, the address out of this mess. and then it will return it to you in a nice Python list. That's very easy to use, right? So these are the kinds of things that you need to be thinking about when you're going to be using the API. Is the API itself is dirt simple. You can learn it. You can copy and paste it in a couple of minutes and start using it. The more interesting stuff is the stuff that goes on either side of that. So as an example, let's go over to my other computer where I used something called Django for one of our classes and one of our labs to build a very basic AI blog system to be able to automatically create blog posts. And so this is a full, quote unquote, full-fledged platform that's fully functional with a database backend, with a user interface front end, the whole 9 yards. Again, to give you a bit better of an idea of how this API fits into a project. So this is on one of our lab computers. So for our labs, we actually use Ubuntu. Works like a champ. Again, in the Silicon Dojo world, our standard coding language is Python, and our web app framework that we use is Django. Django is its whole world. We're not going to go into today. Just understand that you can use it to create web applications such as this. And so this is a blog that has been entirely written by AI. All of these weird blog posts, benefits of coffee with citations, why Gen Z is amazing, why salamanders are stronger than dogs, why cats eat cows. Yes, all of this was created by AI. With this, basically what we're able to do is we give it a prompt, which is essentially a title. It then writes out an entire blog post for us. On top of that, though, it actually will then summarize the blog post. So it'll give us like a 100-word snippet on what the blog post is about. And then at the end down here, it actually also then tags the blog post. So you could create a system for tags where you could click on one of these tags and you could see all of the other posts with the exact same tags, right? And so this kind of, again, very simple system, but gives you an idea of what's going on. I can do new post, right? So I can click on the new post here and I can say, why is Python better than Node? Oh, I'm doing it. And then I can submit the query. So we can see I don't know if you can see the little thing up here. It's kind of going back and forth. So it's going up, it's requesting why Python is better than Node to ChatGPT. And then hopefully in a second, we will get a response. And here's our response. Why is Python better than Node? Summary. Python is considered the better choice over Node. Oh, yes, it is. Due to its simplicity, extensive standard library, versatility, application development, blase. In a world of programming, there's often a debate among developers about which language is superior. Firstly, Python is known, extensive standard library, blase. But anyways, so this is an overall system. Again, give me another 2 days and I would clean this thing up and you could actually throw this out onto an actual web server if you really wanted to. But this is kind of what an end product looks like when you're using the API and kind of gives you that idea of the kind of thing that you can design. So there you go. You have had your introduction to the ChatGPT API with a whole bunch of stories and monologues and everything to go along with this. I do think the stories and monologues are important in this modern world of being a technology professional, because what I see with a lot of folks nowadays is there is depression. Do you say a depression with the young people, right? There's really this view in the modern world that everything is going to go to hell. There's nothing you can do to stop it. And so basically, why try? Which, we've seen that for the past decade for a lot of people. But in the technology world people have been all excited because they're above those folks. They're not coal miners. They're not waiters. They're not secretaries. They're technology professionals. They'll be protected, right? And so we've seen this, right? The tech world has just exploded with all these, sort of happy people in the tech world kind of feeling like they're pretty secure. AI comes out and all of a sudden you start seeing some really depressed young people. And all I want to say for the folks out there, as a technology professional, been doing this stuff since 1996, is everything changes. If you are a professional because you know one skill and you don't want to learn anything else, learn any other skills, then you're going to be screwed one way or the other. It's not about AI. It's just things will change. It's just the state of how things are, right? But if you're willing to look at these new technologies, if you're willing to look at these resources, if you're willing to talk to and listen to the stakeholders in your organization to better understand what problems they have, and then figure out how things like this can try to solve those problems, you will be fine. Technology professionals, there will be technology professionals until the end of humanity, right? Technology professionals and prostitutes, we're here till the end. What we're doing at the end of the day probably look a lot different than it does today. So anyways, that's just kind of one of those things to be thinking about. Again, with this whole advent of AI, the end of the tech profession is not nigh. It's not going to be coming anytime soon. One of the things to be thinking about with these kind of systems and using these APIs is really start thinking about how you would use this type of stuff in a production environment. One of the things that does really concern me about technology professionals is this whole idea that you are just going to hand off a metric crap ton of work to AI. Now, there's a whole bunch of security implications and regulatory implications and other stuff to doing that. But beyond that, just from a brass tack standpoint, that might get expensive incredibly quickly, right? Coming up with proper database queries and that type of thing, and databases with the right data stores and all that kind of stuff, that can be difficult, time-consuming, frustrating. So I can see a lot of technology professionals out there basically thinking, look, I'm just going to have LLM do it. Think about it. If all of your users are hitting something like the ChatGPT API and it's costing you a penny, 10 pennies, $1, $4 per query, again, how quickly will your company go bankrupt? So when you're designing systems from the get-go, you should be designing your systems to use AI in a fashion that will not essentially bankrupt your company. Again, think about at scale. When you see your application at scale, will the monthly cost still be reasonable for your company, or will they be screwed? The other thing to be thinking about this is, again, caching. Caching has kind of gone out of vogue for some reason. Everybody wants new and fancy. I want my own unique response. I don't want somebody else's AI response. I want my own unique one. Think about this for a second. Every time that the ChatGPT runs one of these queries, right? It's using very expensive GPUs. So NVIDIA has these GPUs that cost $10,000. Is it $10,000 or $40,000? I don't know, a crap ton of money. Like each one, it's like $10,000 to $40,000 per. And so when you're doing actual AI queries, right? You're going to ChatGPT or Bard or whatever else, and you're hammering the hell out of those GPUs. It's incredibly expensive. The GPU, the hardware itself is expensive. It costs a lot in electricity to run those types of servers. It is just brutal. On the other hand, a little database query, you can basically do on a potato. I mean, you can't really do it on a potato, but you get my drift, right? You have a pretty adequate server with really fast storage, solid-state drives or whatever else, with a decent database on there, a decent database store. You can get a lot of performance out of that for almost no money. So if your users are making a request, when those responses come back in from ChatGPT, simply saving into a database what the request was with what the response is, and then when users in the future, when they ask the same question or almost the same question, if they simply get the response that has already previously been given, and then they're just at the end of it or whatever, you just say, "What did this answer your question?" And if not, they click the button then that goes up to ChatGPT. That makes a hell of a lot more sense for everybody. Which at least that would be my thought. So anyways, that's the class for today. That is the class for the ChatGPT API. Again, it is really interesting. It's really fun. Utility purposes, I don't know. Again, I don't think it's gonna. we don't have to worry about this stuff destroying the world or whatever else. But it's definitely very, very cool to use. Again, for creating little web applications, that type of thing. It's a very interactive way to build things and just see how you can design stuff. Again, with Python and Django and whatever else you want to do. So I definitely say you should go out there and play with it. Worst case scenario, it's going to cost you pennies. I've been using ChatGPT now for 4 or 5 months. We've done numerous classes for Silicon Dojo where we have up to 10 people per class where they go through and they do these hands-on projects throughout the class. I've done my testing, the whole 9 yards. I'd be surprised if I've hit $20 at this point. Again, if you use a 3.5 model, to be clear, if you use a 3.5 model, it is very, very, very inexpensive. So I definitely say go out there and start playing with it. I think it's an interesting tool to use. So anyways, as always, I did enjoy teaching this class and look forward to seeing you at the next one.